So this is my final major project presentation. Now, how did I choose my topics? What are my interests? What am I knowledgeable about? Does my topic have a potential market? And does my topic have depth and scope, which means that I can develop it into a kind of fully realised and in-depth piece for a final major project? And to answer the first, what are my interests? Well, clearly many of you will know that my interest is that. Am I going to do you a piece about dogs? No, I'm not. There was a very good final major project done some years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago now, about dogs, actually, which involved somebody volunteering at Battersea Dogs Home and writing about dogs and writing about staffies, particularly the Dangerous Dogs Act and all sorts of things about dogs. Made a very good project, actually. So dogs would be a very good topic, but I am not going to choose it. Instead,
Board games.
Of course it is. Look at that. So, that is your correspondent in his other role as a board game player with the Bath local board game group. So, why modern board games? Why modern board games? This is a random selection of modern board games. No Monopoly, no, because that's a family game. Which these developed later than Monopoly and have different mechanics and all sorts of things, which make them more interesting. So why board games? They are relatively unknown. Few people here will know much about board games except Amber, who is newly introduced to the world of board games. It is, however, a fast-growing niche, which makes it quite interesting journalistically. There's a lot going on with it. It's a tactile medium. It's 3D physical gaming, which you meet around a table. We may remember board games fondly, but there are lots of new developments. So there's kind of a double angle of interest that we can mine with this article, with this piece. Lots of change and dynamism in the market, so that's good. Change and dynamism is good journalistically speaking. Many games can appeal to different demographics. Again, that's another rich element to it. And there's a thriving community and many upcoming designers, and that will be important when we come on to the narrative strand, the narrative stance that I'm going to take. So, why board games? Well, how cool are they? The Stylist has the UK's best board game cafes and bars. There's Drafts in Hackney, Chance Encounters in Bristol, which I've never got to yet, which I'd like to. Thirsty Meeples is famous in Oxford. It's just cool. It's hipster cool, right? You may not think that, but oh, it's true. Driven by millennials, that's going to be important later on. So there's a kind of demographic of play here, which we will talk about a bit later. It's booming. So there's various statistics which I've dragged up. CAGR, which is compound annual growth rate, predicted 9% for board games. Global sales, that's of all kinds of games and puzzles and toys, actually, but it's a big market. I mean, £10 billion nearly is a big market. There's stuff happening, big international conventions. There's the one in Birmingham, there's the one in Spiel in Essen. There are others, big events. And big events mean that you have opportunities for reportage, which is very good. Okay, here are some examples. So if you haven't heard of Ticket to Ride, shame on you, because it sold $150 million worth at least. Well, more now, because that's several years old. Settlers of Catan, which is the one that started it all in 1995. And Pandemic, which is very good. It's a very good game. And Cooperative, which is a new sort of angle of board games. Mostly people think of playing against each other in Monopoly, and it's all sort of hateful. But Pandemic is all cooperative and lovely. And cooperative and lovely will lead me on to my market a bit later on. Which platform? Could I do it as video or TV? And you probably could. So you could, particularly because you have like a board game event going on. So you could maybe have a 10-minute item on a regional current affairs show, I thought, about the show, about going to the show and talking to people and looking, talking to the exhibitors and looking at people playing games. And that's that's not what I do, but it could be a BBC Three topic, but you'd have to focus on something like Asperger's or some kind of really, kind of BBC Three thing. I don't think it would work as a BBC Three topic normally. The thing is that games are very visual, but gaming is not a visual story, so it wouldn't be about the gaming particularly. I wasn't keen on it as a video TV thing, that you could do it as that, but I think there's potential for a second platform in video or TV. Radio, the topic is great for Radio 4 actually, quirky, nostalgic, inclusive, creative, blah blah blah, but really gaming is not a sound It's not an oral experience. I mean, you know, people are sitting around a table in silence, so that doesn't really make a very good narrative. You could do. It's also, you can't show the games in radio, which is a shame because they're visual items. I do think there is potential for a second platform with radio or audio, so I'll come on to that later. But really, I think the ideal platform is written. Could be print, could be online, because you balance narrative and visual content, which is good because the games are visual. You can carry narrative ideas, paint a picture with words, and show the images. I think that's a really good blend for board games. And because, you know, we're talking about supplementary platforms, an online feature could have that material embedded in it, which I think there's a lot of potential. One of those would be my preferred platform. I haven't decided which yet. Which publication to target? Now, what would be a suitable publication? There's specialist or there's mainstream, and you might imagine that specialist tabletop gaming would be an ideal, something ideal for this. But there's a ready-made audience for that. But there are a few print publications for a start. It's a very niche audience, and that means that there's a very heavy focus on game detail. So basically, I would be speaking to the converted. I wouldn't be able to do a wide general interest piece. I think that's a more interesting story to tell. I think in the mainstream, general interest allows you to treat the subject flexibly. It gives you lots of options in narrative terms. I think that's very strong. A lot more in terms of possible publications. One thing, it's not a con exactly, but you have to bear in mind that you need to game-splain things, so you need to explain your terms, and you can't get too gamey. You have to always think about your audience, which is, of course, a typical thing in journalism. One can't get away from that. But so I think that the mainstream is much more gives much more opportunity for this project, so that's where I'm going to go. There's no question which publication, it's The Guardian. Why The Guardian, you ask? Quite rightly so. No, I know. Events, dear boy, events. The Guardian, in its new weird format, I like the blue, anyway. So The Guardian, no, just the recent redesign. So it's a daily tabloid newspaper. That's wrong, I had to update that. Does it still have the weekend edition with the lifestyle supplement? I hope it does. Comprehensive news and features website. It's left-leaning, internationalist in Outlook and pro-EU/Remain. That's important. That's not important, but it is relevant. So all of these things are The Guardian. So it's left of centre, clearly. It's the most left of centre perceived newspaper, according to YouGov research. It's very pro-Remain. It's the second most pro-Remain newspaper. Its audience is well-educated, upmarket, slightly male, although not as male as most media outlets, and popular with millennials. Now, did I mention that games is driven by millennial users and millennial players? It is, which means that The Guardian's kind of millennial demographic is a good fit for that. Well educated in that market, we think games players are that as well, actually. And crucially, this is the most important thing, it already covers the hobby. It's got a regular monthly column by a board game blogger, occasional articles by other writers, but it hasn't done it to death. It's there, but it's not there oversaturated, and that's a really sweet spot for pitching article ideas to a newspaper or magazine or website. It must be interested in it enough to kind of cover it, but you don't want, you want to have space to do something different. Other newspapers actually do touch on board games. The Telegraph has done it, the Times probably has done it, but they don't do it with quite the same level of understanding and sympathy as The Guardian does it. So I think The Guardian's a really good fit for it. And I'd probably try and build some of this into the narrative, is that the leftish outlook fits in with that new board game ethic of board games are not too fighty, they're a bit more cooperative, they're more inclusive. There's a big dominance of European designers. Hey, pro-Remain. So the internationalist Remain stance really fits in with this whole internationalist board game community, which is very good. And the audience thing, the millennials and hipster thing, obviously is right for the trendy Guardian. So I think these will play a part in the tone and sourcing of the article, and also I think they really help with the fit of the article with the paper. Narrative angles. So I thought, on reading the coverage, which I have done somewhat in the process of this, quite a bit of has been covered with board games and who plays them and what they are and all this sort of stuff, but not so much about the process of designing the games. And I think designing the games is really interesting because the community is such that hobbyists and players often become reviewers and designers. It's a very open field. And there's a human interest angle to people, getting into their hobby so much that they become the makers of the hobby. Many in the community aspire to design games, and some manage to make a living from it, but even if they don't, they enjoy doing it, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for doing that. So I think the narrative angle is going to be about how board game fans aim to turn their hobby into a career. That's my kind of top line at the moment, before I've actually done the research. So questions to ask: how do you go about designing a board game? How do you fund the development? What happens about manufacturing? How do you market and sell the game? You can weave that all into a narrative with a focus on the human interest angle, obviously. Format: typical interviewers with game designers and publishers. Reportage of game design meetups, and ideally reportage from a games expo. Timing is crucial here. The Games Expos happen, unfortunately, outside the scope of this project. So in an ideal world, I would have already gone to Spiel last October and done my reportage then. But I didn't. So anyway, but were I in your shoes and were I thinking about this in good time, I would have done. Okay, so research. How do you research it? The great thing about board games is that nearly everyone in that community is on here, which is the Board Game Geek. And that is fabulous. So it has a really rich pool of research resources, and it has a built-in contact mechanism, private email. So if you're registered on the site and somebody else like Alan R. Moon, who designed Ticket to Ride, is registered on the site, which he is, you can send him an email through the site. Now obviously people don't have to respond to your emails, but given that you are a fan, you're registered on the site, I am a fan, I'm registered on the site, and I'm emailing lots of designers, I should get some response. So that's a really fantastic thing about this particular topic in terms of research. There's also lots of stuff going on. So Playtest UK Games Meetup Group. Playtesting is where you get prototypes of the games that you're designing and you bring them to a group and everyone plays them and critiques them. And that happens, that's a thing, happens all around the country. Enthusiastic designers who are both complete novices and also more experienced designers will do this because you need to get your game play tested. I mean, there's no question about it. So you can meet a range of designers. There's lots of opportunity for both atmospheric reportage of what it's like, and playing with bits of cardboard that somebody's cut out of a cereal packet, and also talking to potential designers. There's lots of scope for going to a meetup and actually getting good sources out of it. That's Chris Marling, who has come here to talk about SEO as a visiting speaker, and I know him through work. But he's got into games design. He is a guy he's now got 3 games under his belt, and he's actually a good contact in his own right. But he has collaborated with other designers, which means that he's got other good contacts. And I will be on the phone to him as soon as I possibly can, saying, "Chris, help me out with this." Have I got further than this in my presentation? Secondary platform. That's as far as I got because I got sidetracked. Last night, instead of doing my secondary platform slide, I watched the UK's 100 favourite dogs. Did anyone see that? Assume that I'm now talking about my secondary platform. The 2 things I had immediately in mind were, one, a podcast discussion. So sit a few designers around a table. Chris and his mates would be ideal, actually, and just get them to talk in a kind of podcast style about their experiences designing and marketing a game. And that could make an interesting kind of more in-depth kind of interview type podcast that could be interesting. Another idea is obviously when you think of games, you think of roll and move as a mechanic, which is you roll dice and you move counters, you roll dice and you move counters, which is a very boring thing. And what are games and how do they work? And there could be a little explanatory video, game-splaining, actually what the games are and what they look like and how they play, some of the mechanics, which might be interesting if you say, well, what do they like, these games? So you could have a little explainy video showing techniques of gaming. That's the kind of area that I'd be looking at. It's not as formed, I have to say, so that's still to be maybe developed more. And that's my presentation.